argument in itself is an argument for a non-God designer. That to whatever degree the fine-tuning argument works for us to conclude a designer, to a comparable or to an even stronger degree, the argument is just an argument for atheism. And atheism because it's because the evidence is far more compatible with a non-God designer than a God designer. Not just perfect being, but also even imperfect being gods. And you'll notice that and this holds true for, this is going to be true for just almost every cosmological, well, at least the classic cosmological constants that fine-tuning proponents use in the first place. It's also going to be true for the steps that fine-tuning proponents use to change the possibility distribution to a probability distribution by saying appeal to some sort of evidence about agents and trying to feed that into the prior to change the possibility distribution to a probability distribution, because presumably to avoid any stalking horse objections, because we can generate a theistic hypothesis for every single fine-tuning, for every single constant, cosmological or otherwise, on any sort of theory of however many constants there are, any configuration, we can generate a theistic hypothesis. We can say, well, there's a God that just prefers the constants to be such and such, and whether that is for life or not life, there is a theistic hypothesis for it. So there's a theistic hypothesis for any of the cosmological constants, regardless of whether it's life permitting or not. And so for any distribution, for any possibility distribution, we can always set up a theistic hypothesis that maybe God just found that particular arrangement of constants to be special. Now, the move that fine-tuning proponents make there is they say, okay, well, that is the possibility distribution. You can do that, but we're going to make a move to change the possibility distribution to a probability distribution such that it's different. And the move there is to say, well, we'll make some inference about agents. Agents like to create things. They like to create life. And so we broaden that piece of the pie away from the possibility distribution. Of course, the issue is that, whatever agent one would appeal to, for as far as data goes, is also an agent that's imperfect. It's also an agent that has not only imperfect, but also has no divine properties. And so if every agent we've observed is imperfect and has no divine properties, it increases our priors that perhaps the agent that created the universe also is imperfect and has no divine properties. Also, the further issue is that even what we're updating on, which is the constants itself, the notion of fine-tuning is presented in such a way is that like you hit the bullseye or something. But that's not true. It's not that the universe is fine-tuned for life. It's that it's just barely tuned for life. It's more so the case that the universe just squeezed into the fine-tuning life-permitting constants rather than they're dead in the center of it. Presumably, if you had a perfect being that would fine-tune the universe for life, the perfect being would tune it perfectly. In other words, perfect beings do things perfectly. Any task that they do that they have the goal of doing, they would do so in a perfect way. And we can have may not be sure. We could have like some theories about what it means to perfectly design a universe for life. What does it mean to tune a universe for life? But whatever it is, it's certainly not this. If you think about, and there are Googles of ways to change the constants of the universe that would be more life permitting, of course. To a greater degree of the ratios. So like whatever Penrose ratio, I don't even think Penrose's number is correct, by the way, we can get into that, but it's still going to be large. I don't think it's 10 to the whatever 120 something. I think that's based on old outdated science. If you account for multiple constants correlated with each other and being able to vary multiple at the same time, and if you also account for certain assumptions that turned out to not be true with Penrose, probably my best estimate will be the ratio of life permitting to non-life permitting constants is going to be 1 in 10 to the 50 or something, not 1 in 10 to the 123. Still a very incredibly high number.
I thought Penrose's number was 1 in 10 to the 10 to the 123.
Yes.
No, I agree. I don't buy Penrose's number. So that was for, I think, entropy, right?
That was for what?
I think that was Penrose's number for entropy.
It was.
For
It
like
was. Well, I'm just talking about the number he posited. Well, the number that's cited for the ratio of life permitting to non-life permitting constants. It's not a very important point. The point is just that I think it's overstated. It's the reason it's overstated, and later work has updated those estimates. Two main reasons. One reason is they've assumed that you can only vary one constant at the same time without any assumptions about assuming there's independent of constants from the other constants. And the other issue is that certain assumptions turn out to not be true, such as whether stars would be able to survive due to whether there's assuming a certain stability of certain subatomic particles would be the case. But it turns out that there are certain assumptions that turned out to be false, and it turned out that those weren't required, and that decreases that number. So, but it's still very large. But the point is that that ratio, whatever that ratio is, happens to be my best estimate is going to be like 10 to the power of 50. But whatever it is, I think it's actually larger, that you'd find yourself in the an even more problematic number that you would expect the universe to be just barely life permitting if you'd have a designer that's perfectly designing this for life. We sort of the better it would be like saying the universe was designed for planes. And it's true that the ratio of plane permitting universes is 10 to the 50 or something ridiculous, to non-plane permitting universe to plane permitting universe is 10 to the 50. But if we just posited that the universe's constants and laws were such and such that the only plane that would ever be able to be developed was the first Wright brothers plane, that is a very clunky plane that just barely takes off, and then it either flies for 2 seconds and crashes or something. If it was that sort of plane that was the only plane to be built, it would look very silly to say, well, clearly a perfect being designed the universe for planes. Well, no. It would be much more compatible with some hypothesis that there was some sort of scientist or entrepreneur that was designing a universe for planes, and they kind of just barely got a working prototype or something. That's the sort of hypothesis that's going to be much more explanatory of the data than to say a perfect being perfectly designed the universe for planes. But the plane issue is exactly what we have with life. It's like the universe is not tuned for life. It's tuned for life in the sense that it's permitting for life, doesn't violate a physical law. It's possible, but it's just barely possible. If you look at the totality of the universe and what we already know, at best case scenario, and this is not even if we assume aliens exist, even if we assume life isn't even only on Earth, this would be true. The vast majority of the Earth's existence is going to be in life impossible conditions. It's going to be in the heat death of the universe, and it didn't have to be that way. The heat death of the universe it's not the majority of our case is not the inflationary or the matter dependent epoch of the universe. Not even the vast majority. It's going to be to the order of like 10 to the power of 1,000, compared to any amount of time that the universe is going to spend in life possible conditions. And so, essentially, if you looked at the universe like a book, you'd see a tiny little dot on the first page that you couldn't even identify with a microscope, which would be the life permitting epoch of the universe, and then the rest of the book is just going to be a blank page of non-life. Is essentially what our universe is, and it didn't have to be that way. There's Google different ways of configuring the universe such that you would have a longer period of life and more life and much more habitable. So, for example, you can take the vacuum energy. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So, sorry. Do you have more things to say? If not, I'll
well, those are the main thrust. I mean, if you want the empirics on it, we can get to the empirics. But
okay, yeah, sounds good. So, yeah, I mean, so there was a lot there that I disagreed with. I guess I'll start with regarding the 10 to the 120th number, or 10 to the 50th. I'm not a physicist. I don't know exactly, maybe the 10 to the 50th number is right, but I don't think this will be hugely consequential for our disagreement, because basically you shouldn't generally take the hit on just like a thing with odds of 1 in 10 to the 50th having
No.
happened.
There's a reason for that I mentioned it. The reason that I mentioned it is that to whatever degree one is going to be motivated by a number that's 10 to the whatever. The same problem obtains when you compare the slice of the universe we're in, which is much more compatible with a very horrible designer for life that just barely scraped by, which is a sliver of slice in and of itself, and that's going to be a more impressive ratio number.
Sorry,
So
what are you saying is a sliver regarding
so there's two slivers. So we're two slivers. So well, there's three slivers really, but okay. So the first sliver is what the sliver you're familiar with, which is the sliver of life permitting conditions, life permitting constants, compared to non-life permitting constants. The life permitting constants is going to be a little sliver compared to the non-life permitting constants. But then when we look at the life permitting constants, there are slivers within the life permitting constants that are going to be far more or less expected on different hypotheses. For example, if we had a hypothesis that the designer is a highly imperfect designer that just barely scraped by, that actually is a very tiny sliver of the life permitting constants. And it's even a smaller sliver, by the way, than the it's arguably even a smaller sliver, at least, than the 10 to the 50 or even 10 to the 120, 123, than the ratio of the sliver of life permitting to non-life permitting constants. Also, what's an even smaller sliver than that is what would be expected on a perfect designer. Because if we think about it, perfect, if someone is designing, like if there is an omnipotent, omnibenevolent being that has the goal of tuning the universe for life, well, how would they do that perfectly? If they're going to optimally do that, that's even a smaller sliver.
Okay.
I mean, maybe there's only one way of doing it.
Avi, are you saying that of the constants that give rise to life, less than 1 in 10 to the 50th of them would only give rise to the relatively modest amount of life that we observe in our universe? Is that the claim?
Yeah, relatively something of that ratio. If you look at all the different ways that you can get life, if you look at all the different ways of the constants that you can get life, the vast amount, the overwhelming amount of ways you could have made those constants would have given far more life than what we have now. To the order of to the same ratio that the fine-tuning impressive ratios are those numbers are positing. So the point is, to the same degree that we can generate a very highly impressive number that one would not want to take a hit on, to say, oh, life versus non-life, we can make a very similar point about the ratios of highly imperfect for life versus anything better than what we have, which would also one would not want to take a hit on.
Yeah. So okay, that's interesting. I wasn't aware of that, but I don't think it majorly affects my judgments about fine tuning. So I guess so you raise sort of two different classes of points. I guess I'll start with the second one first, which is about the kind of like undertuning problem that you think that the universe does not have an adequate degree of fine tuning. It does much less than you'd expect on the hypothesis that there is a perfect designer.
Compared to an imperfect designer.
Yeah. So I don't think that. So I mean, one point is just I think it's pretty plausible. I don't think it's guaranteed, but I think it looks like the following is a view that's held by a lot of physicists, which is that the universe is infinite and contains infinite life. If that's right, then the cardinality of the amount of life will be the same regardless of how densely the life is distributed. So then there isn't actually a reason to suspect.
Wait, hold on. Wait. So you're saying that the universe is infinite. If the universe is infinite, then there's not going to be a difference in cardinality of life?
Right. So the cardinality of the number of living organisms won't differ regardless of how dense the life is. So regardless of what you set the constants to. Like presumably there won't be constants which get you continuum many observers rather than Aleph null observers, for instance.
Well, okay. So if the move is to say, well, you have this book, and then the book is in infinite size for a millisecond. So yeah, you can have a case where it's like you have an infinite amount of life for a millisecond. What would also be true is that the amount of time, it would still be a difference in the amount of time life would exist. So
yeah,
for example, even if the universe is infinite, no one disagrees that the the amount of time that life would exist in this universe is the tiniest little sliver of infinitesimal fraction of the universe, and it didn't have to be that way. You could have had infinite life for the totality of the universe, actually, almost the totality. But now you had infinite life.
Theists typically think that there's an afterlife, so they think that the life that you'll have will last. But
that's appealing to different considerations now. It's not just fine tuning. But I'm just talking about fine tuning.
Sorry, the idea. So we're talking about the probability of fine tuning, given that there's a God, and so for that consideration, the background factors about the probability of other things, if there's a God, are relevant.
Okay, so wait, so we
sorry. Let me just briefly make one point, which is that suppose that there are two possibilities. Possibility one is that you have infinite organisms around, fairly spaced apart forever. Sorry, just for a brief sliver of time. And then the second one is you have infinite organisms that keep at any given time, and the number of organisms keep increasing forever. The cardinality of the number of organisms will be the same at any given time. And so that means that you could have those two universes contain, in principle, exactly the same organisms, but then just have them be differently spaced out. But I don't think there's any reason to think that God would intrinsically care about the spacing out of the organisms.
Not just the spacing out, but the amount of time they would exist. So, for example, we would typically think that if there was a designer that would want to design a universe for life, they wouldn't do it in a way that a life only exists for a millisecond, even if there was an infinite amount of life.
But I don't see why that's true, assuming that the amount of life would still be infinite, right? So assuming that you could have exactly the same class of organisms, and each of the organisms...
So you would take that to be the case, or even if it was like a nanosecond or a microsecond. So
Well, I guess if it were a nanosecond or a microsecond, then I would expect that... Like it seems like you probably would need... I would take it to be surprising if the conscious beings that existed only existed for a very, very short... Like for any individual organism, their lifetime was extremely short. And so, on account of their lifetime being extremely short, they did not have the possibility of accruing a significant number of significantly valuable goods. So if they only lived a nanosecond, like if no one lived more than a nanosecond, I would consider that to be somewhat improbable given theism. But if there was life only for a nanosecond, but over the course of that nanosecond, the conscious organisms had like the subjective experience of many years of life, then that wouldn't seem as surprising. So in other words, if the universe is so short that it places constraints on the lifetimes of the individual organisms, that seems bad in a way where if just there's only some brief period where there is life, where that doesn't seem bad.
Yeah, so the point here is that it's not an incompatibility. You could have a view that, you could have some sort of subset of view about what God would want, where, designing that God would want to design the universe for life in this sort of way. So the point is not that it's impossible, but the point is that it is very surprising. And the reason it's very surprising is if you think about all of the different types of gods that would fit into that category of designing a universe for life, we wouldn't expect it to be just without any further considerations of, we just know that they are all powerful, all knowing, and even with an afterlife, like we wouldn't. This would be very surprising. Because if you think about all the different...
I'm going to have to go on mute for 1 minute. I can still hear you, but just I won't be able to talk for like 1 minute, but I'll be back in a sec. Sorry.
Sure. Yeah. So the issue is just that when one is comparing a perfect being God with the goal of tuning the universe for life, it is possible to generate some sort of version of this God that it would be not surprising that they would make that. Or the point is not that one can't do that. The point is that any of that other work doesn't need to be done for the imperfect designer hypothesis. So perhaps you need to add some other things to the God. You say, okay, well, the God, for whatever reason, doesn't care if life only exists briefly as long as the individuals are there, because they want life to die so they can go to the afterlife. You have to add another auxiliary hypothesis. But those are all going to be things that the non-designer, the designer that's imperfect doesn't have to do. The imperfect designer doesn't need any of those auxiliary hypotheses. They could just say, here's the hypothesis, it's imperfect, and everything's already explained. You don't have to do any of that extra work. You don't need to incur any of those theoretical vices. It's just the data is just there. It's so if someone said, well, it's designed in the same sort of way that it's designed in the same sort of way that an entrepreneur just barely got a prototype working of the universe, or is a scientist just barely got a prototype working of the universe to generate life, and that is all the work is done. I mean, you've explained why the universe barely scraped by. You've explained why the probability of life developing would be very improbable with this universe, and it just so happened to happen. And even if it does happen, we don't actually know if and it also doesn't depend on whether the universe is infinite. Also, you don't have that problem either. You don't have to rest on all of these other assumptions.
Yeah. So I just got back. Right. So I don't actually see why the limited God hypothesis naturally predicts that that you would get only that you'd only barely get life. If you think that the limited God, or sorry,
no,
the
not
limited
just limited, but the shitty designer hypothesis.
But even if the designer is shitty,
yeah.
if nearly all of the ways the constants could be set would get you very abundant life. Then
not very abundant life, just more than we have now.
Sure, right. Would get you vastly, much more abundant life than we have now. Well, then it seems really unlikely that they'd happen to get this very, very small range.
And yet we find ourselves in it. Isn't that the same fine-tuning argument? It's very unlikely, tabula rasa, that we'd find life in the first place.
I'm saying it's likely on the hypothesis that there's a limited designer, that the limited designer would happen to set it. Like, if the limited designer is shitty and so isn't very good at modeling what the constants would be, if set to various levels,
they're not powerful enough to generate one. It doesn't have to be lack of knowledge.
Sure, right. So they're limited in knowledge, they're limited in power, something like that. Well, that doesn't naturally predict that the designer would set things to a very, very, very tiny to a level such that
of course it does.
You get very little.
Yeah, of course it does. What do you mean? If look, of the different designer hypotheses that successfully of the subset that have successfully produced life, the shitty designer hypothesis very naturally predicts this data.
Okay, here's an analogy. Okay, let's imagine that let's imagine that there's a biosphere that someone is being made in a laboratory. And so the biosphere has been set up, and there are various different parameters that go into the biosphere. Like, maybe one of the parameters is temperature, maybe one of the parameters is, I don't know, various kinds of soil, etc. Yeah. And it turns out that you look in the biosphere and you discover all of these things were set in ways that produce some life, but a very, very tiny amount of life, right? So all of them, the odds of if they were set by chance and gave rise to life, the odds of setting them to this very low level are less, in your view, than 1 in 10 to the 160th. Well, then it would be reasonable to say, not that this is some shitty designer, but this designer actually displayed a startling range of competence in order to produce such a small amount of life. So I think the better hypothesis, for your point, would be if the designer wants life, but not too much, rather than being an incompetent designer. But then you sort of need an epicycle there. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So the point. So when you say it's if someone says is they're poor, so you're saying if you just barely scrape by, then it's somehow better that it's somehow a better hypothesis that we've wanted. Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. So there's two issues. So the first issue is we're talking about the subset of universes, a subset of worlds where we're considering the hypotheses where the designer has a goal of fine-tuning the universe for life. If you want to say, if we're adding other hypotheses where they don't have that goal, where they're saying where they don't have the goal of doing this of perfectly designing the universe for life, where they want to do that, yeah, one can generate an alternative hypothesis, just that, well, someone just wanted to build a horrible plane. Now, I think there's reasons that we wouldn't that we wouldn't expect that hypothesis, that we wouldn't favor it. For example, if the Wright brothers plane, we wouldn't want to say that the Wright brothers just why did they generate such a shitty plane? Well, the reason the Wright brothers generated such a shitty plane is because they had such competence with planes, and they just so happened to produce the shittiest one.
Wait,
No.
but there's a clear difference, which is that of the planes that could be designed by a person, sort of like it's not the case that nearly all of them would be.
Yeah, it is. Nearly all of them would be better. Hello? Did we lose him?
Parameterization, where you're like,
Sorry,
the Wright brothers.
We lost you for a second. I didn't hear. We lost you for a bit.
Oh, sorry. What I was saying was that there's not a natural way of doing the parameterization where you'd say, oh, the odds of, if you make a plane by chance, the odds of it being that shitty are near zero. I don't know exactly what I mean. First of all,
who said we're?
Sorry. Let me just briefly finish the point. It's not obvious actually, like, how to divvy up the relevant probabilities of agents making planes of different kinds, and so, like, there isn't some constant that you can take the values over. So it's not like you can. There isn't a meaningful way of saying the odds of the Wright brothers making a plane that shitty by chance are very low. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Wait, hold on. What I'm not understanding here is that if one had an hypothesis that, so if one had a hypothesis that someone is designing planes and they're just bad at it, there's certain things that are expected on that hypothesis and not expected on that hypothesis. Now, you might be able to underdetermine that with a hypothesis that someone deliberately wanted to make shitty planes, and that's fine. We could get into that, but what's certainly not going to be on the table is that, or what's certainly going to be far less off the table, either of those hypotheses, is going to be some hypothesis that there was a competent designer that had the goal of optimally producing planes, like some perfect being designer that wanted to make good planes. So either way, like, we can. I think that there may be a debate to be had there. I think that that background considerations may favor one over the other, but I don't think that really matters that much, because regardless,
so I agree with you that the like, there's a designer who makes shitty planes. Sorry, that there's like a perfect designer is not a good explanation of the Wright brothers, of the planes that are made by the Wright brothers. What I was saying was that, so first of all, I think there are a few important differences between the plane example and the example of the universe. One of the important differences is that if what you're saying is correct, then actually the universe sort of like has been abnormally shittily designed, in that it's been designed so that it produces an abnormally low amount of life. And so then it actually begins to look like it needs like a really extraordinary degree of competence. Right? So imagine you were watching a chess game, and every move the chess player made over the course of a very long chess game was the worst possible move.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Well, interestingly, then you should think they're very competent.
Yeah. It's not that. Yeah, it's not that shittily arranged. It's pretty. No. So I'm not saying, just to be clear, I'm not saying that the universe is maximally optimized for a very low amount of life. I'm not saying it's like the perfect arrangement. There are ways you can arrange the constants such that you'll get even less life. So
Sure.
that
Okay.
it's not going to be like that.
Right. So
it's
imagine...
just it's just basically just essentially the analogy would be like if you had a bullseye and you're trying and you have to hit the bullseye, those the little circles and the yellow one is in the center, I think, whatever color is in the center. It would be like someone who shoots the arrow and doesn't land in the center of the bullseye, but just makes it into the bullseye.
But Avi, didn't you say that the odds of getting an amount of life this low were on the order of 1 in 10 to the 60th?
Oh yeah. It's something
Sure.
crazy.
So,
it's definitely going to be something. You're just the reason the reason I took issue is just because there's also going to be orders of magnitudes of ways you could get less life than that. But yes, I mean, yeah, you could get. There are ways you could do it of getting less life. So you present it as like a maximally.
Wait, sorry. So what in your estimation is the probability of getting roughly this amount of life or less?
Oh, roughly this amount of life or less, compared to more life. It's going to be a pretty small sliver. It's going to be. I'd have to come back with the actual. Will
it be on the order of 1 in 10 to the 60th?
Will it be on the order of 1 in 10 to the 60th? It may very. I think so. I'd have to just double check the.
Right. So my point is, if that's right, then it begins to look like the designer was very, very competent.
No, but I've already addressed that. I've already said that you can debate that hypothesis. That's a hypothesis that can be debated against because look, there's two hypotheses that would naturally expect this. One hypothesis is that it's a sort of Wright brother analogy where they just basically found. There's two ways you can get there. It's like you can just become competent in the slightest degree, and if you just happen to become competent in the slightest degree, everyone gets there at some point. Like if you map someone's skill level over time, everyone's going to cross some threshold at some point if they improve, unless they never get there.
Right. Sorry. At this point, I'm just trying to establish that the odds of this on the imperfect designer hypothesis are very low. And then and then later we can talk about the odds of it on the perfect designer hypothesis, because I think that they're much higher than you're giving it credit.
So the imperfect designer.
Right. So the point is just that if you think that this universe is of the universes that are life permitting, abnormally non-conducive to life, then it's it's analogous to the chess player who always picks the worst move, or picks a set of moves that are sufficiently bad that the odds that you would get those moves by chance are 1 in 10 to the 60th, roughly. If you observed that, what you would not say is, well, there's just a shitty chess player. What you would say is, there's a chess player who's very competent but is optimizing for something weird. At least that would be the most natural assumption. Now, in a moment, I'll dispute whether that generalizes to God.
Right. Okay. So so we can so you can I'm already again I've already so I'm not sure. So if it really is a chess that's like they're really optimizing to the worst move, then I agree. It would be like something like, okay, well they're set in some way. I'm not sure. Yeah, so they would be set in some way. So that is an hypothesis. Of course, the hypotheses that were under consideration is someone actually has the goal of tuning the universe for life. So either of those hypotheses is going to not be that sort of thing. So even if one agrees that, okay, well, maybe there's this, maybe it's more expected on this being that is just selecting for some very minimal amount of life. That is what one can take that view. Although whatever perfectly tuning the universe for life is, I just don't think it's going to be that, because whatever the planes are, whether
So we can discuss in a moment the probability that you get these observations if there were a perfect designer. Yeah. I'm just asking, can we agree that if there was an imperfect designer, you would expect the degree of
imperfection to not be so precise?
Yes.
Yeah. So I agree with that, and I will have to, and I can come back with the numbers on what that is. But let's just say, what would you expect the numbers to be if we would expect just an imperfect designer?
Right. Okay. So I actually think so. you're correct about the calculations, that we have this deeply abnormal sliver of probability space, I actually think this makes the fine-tuning argument better, because I think, for reasons I was describing, I think it's unlikely on the limited designer hypothesis. I think it's unlikely on the multiverse hypothesis, which I consider to be the best atheistic alternative to fine-tuning. And so,
what would you take about this sliver? Hold on. So here's the sliver. Like, here's the sliver in general. Like, so it's not, so it may not be as much of a sliver on this, but so it's like, so the star represents where our universe is. The red line represents, the energy the limitation of how high our energy density could go, and then the Q.
Wait, sorry, are you posting a diagram somewhere?
Yes.
And if so,
yeah, general chat.
Okay, sorry. Okay, sorry. Give me one. My phone's in black and white, so I'm going to turn it into color to see the chart more clearly. Okay. Yes, I see the chart.
Yeah. So at least from this one, it's actually not it's not 10 to the 60 or whatever, but it's you can see how, like, you see how the star just sort of goes under the red line.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the star on the graph represents our current position in the universe, where that represents our current constant value for the cosmological constant, and the value of Q, the primordial amplitude of the primordial density fluctuations in the early universe, and any under the these different thresholds is going to be life permitting conditions on those two constants. So the lower values of the cosmological constant is going to almost certainly produce more life. If you get it low enough, you can have higher values of Q that would result more life. But yeah, now that I'm looking at this, just represented on this graph, it doesn't seem like as much of a sliver as I initially made it out to be. But I can get to why there are reasons that we might think it might be smaller.
Sorry,
but
can you give me? Sorry, so I guess what would be your? So I'm not a math guy.
Yeah.
So can you tell me what your estimate is of what the sliver would be?
So like I said, I have to give you a mapped out estimate of more life versus less life. I haven't done that calculation yet, but at least on this graph, I can do that. I can estimate that quickly for you. Let's see. The log scale. So we have 0. It's going to be next 0. If we take the bottom to be the parameter, so at 5.3, okay, times 10.
I at one point, do you know Mark Grant?
What? Mark Grant?
Sorry, I was just going to make it. This would be slightly off. I was just going to say, I at one point, I joked that I would be scared to debate Mark Grant about anthropics because he would employ unfair debate tactics, like using calculus. But so
I'm not. Oh, if the analogy here, I'm not trying to bring up the.
No. Sorry, to be clear, I wasn't.
No,
I wasn't accusing you of like. No, I wasn't saying this was like irrelevant or. Sorry, it just popped into my head and I thought it was funny, so I decided to relay it. But to be clear, I think you're fine. I think this has been useful and edifying. The graph.
So, yeah. So, like, for example, if we take 6, I think 6 is the value taken to be 6 times 10 to the power of -10 is the value taken to be the upper limit. So times 10 to the power of 10. And then what our current value is 5.3 to the power of -10. Sorry. And then 5.3. Where's okay. Yeah. And so if they're saying it goes down, it can go down to closer to 0. And so if it goes down closer, so if our upper limit is there and then 0, so 5.3 times the -10, it's going to depend on what our normalization on what our possibilities of what the constants can be. Just looking at this, I haven't fully done that specific calculation yet. So what I can tell you is that it's probably around. It's at least going to be like probably 5% or lower, probably maybe 1% or lower. I don't know exactly. I
No,
haven't
that's a
really-
far cry from 1 in 10 to the 60th.
no, it is. Well, the reason I think, well, I can go through the reasoning of why one can make a case that it could be 1 in 10 to the 60, and that's because but that's going to assume possible values. So, for example, are you familiar with the cosmological constant?
Yeah.
Okay. So, like, and you're familiar with the cosmological constant is analogous to the energy density of space, the vacuum
I
energy density.
think so, sort of. Vague.
Yeah, p of the cosmological constant. The energy. So, the energy density is a very low. It's a low number. It's like 5.3 times 10 to the power of negative 10 per cubic meter.
Mhm.
So and you'd think that, okay, well, that value is, very small, and it is. And in fact, this is one of the values that are used by the proponents of the fine-tuning argument to say that, okay, well, that's why we should think it's fine-tuned, because it's so small. Because if it was larger, if it was over 6 or something, we would think that, okay, well, then it wouldn't it would be too much of a fast expansion to permit life. And so the issue is that the values that are lower than that are actually more permitting for life. So values that are under 5.3 times 10 to the power of negative 10, so like 5.3 times 10 to the power of negative 20 or something, would be more permitting for life. So
Okay.
but however, the question is, in terms of the question of like whether that possibility range, whether we get 5%, 10%, or 1 to the power of 60%, depends on what that parameter is going to vary to. So if we represent the energy density as the total energy in the universe, it sounds like a small number if we do that, but it's actually a very large amount of energy. So if we take the total observable universe, that actually comes out to be like 1 times 10 to the 70 joules. And if we assume that any amount of that could be lower, then and that's only just the observable universe. Most scientists believe that the diameter is at least 250 times larger than the observable universe. So then we get like to the power of almost like 80. And even so then we would end up in a situation where it is very large. However, if that move is illegitimate somehow, if that move doesn't represent the parameters, then if there's something wrong with what I did there to represent it as the total energy in the universe, for some reason maybe it's quantized in some way where it would just be better represented on graphs like these, then it might be like 1% or 5% or something around that. I don't know.
Okay,
And
right. So in any case, it's low, and exactly how low it is sort of a matter. It's sort of like it's either very, very near zero or like a few percent. Okay, that I guess. So I'll just ask you, in your physics expertise, would you guess that it's more like a few percent, or would you guess that it's more like 1 in 10 to the 60th?
Well, again, that I'm not a physics expert. It's just that I've looked. It's just that I've actually looked into what other physics experts are saying about this, and I don't think actually physics experts. I mean, to whatever degree, I'm just saying, to whatever degree this is an issue, it's going to be an issue to parameters of fine tuning broadly, because I don't know. So my answer to your question is I'm not sure, and I'd have to get back to you if I don't think the argument hinges on it either way, but I can understand why you would think it would be stronger if it was, on the order of like 1 or 2 or 5% or something, rather than something like to power of negative whatever, to the power of like 50.
Sorry, what I think that
Mhm.
I guess my assessment of how good the fine tuning argument is as a function of this might be
Mhm.
like I actually think sort of, well, it's unclear how it changes between like 100% and 1%. But I think as you go down lower to lower and lower odds by chance, the fine tuning argument counterintuitively gets better. And the reason for this is what I was explaining earlier, which is that the probability of you getting this an extremely precise degree.
No, I
of,
understand. I understand the
Wait,
rationale.
well, sorry, I haven't yet explained the second part, which is why I don't think of why I don't think the odds are vanishingly low given theism. Right. So I think the odds are very low given a limited designer or given a multiverse. Right. You would expect nearly everyone to be in the very tuned universes. What about given a perfect being? Given a perfect being, I guess my assessment is I think we're not totally in the dark, but I think we're somewhat in the dark about the range of reasons that a perfect being has, and so we don't actually know like it's fairly difficult to know what the odds are that a perfect being would make universes like this. So, uh, so you were saying that you think the odds are really low because
So what I'm saying, yeah, for perfect
wait,
being,
wait,
at least for perfect being,
yeah,
what I'm saying is like the perfect being is going to be like we might have some problems understanding what if someone like again, it's the maybe you could break the analogy with the planes, but the planes for me is what is motivating me here. It's saying that okay, well, look, I mean, do I have a full, fleshed out understanding of what it would mean for a perfect being to tune the universe for planes? I don't. I don't know if that's going to mean, we have a bunch of, B-52 spirits flying, or we're going to have B-2, B-2 spirits flying, or B-2 raiders flying, or, F-22s or Raptors or whatever. I don't know, but whatever it does mean, whatever the perfect the perfect being with the goal of tuning the universe for planes, whatever that's going to look like, it's not going to be like a world full of Wright brothers planes.
Yeah,
So,
sure. So
yeah.
right. So I think there are a few important bits of the disanalogy. So what you've pointed out about life, you've pointed to two factors that you think make it so that the universe doesn't look finely tuned for life in a way that you'd expect of a perfect designer, which is that life is fairly rare and life is
extremely fleeting in possibility.
right. So it's rare and it's fleeting in possibility. Now note, if you think the universe is infinite, then you could change the density, both how fleeting it is in possibility and how rare it is, just by moving people around in space-time. Right. So if you just transported people to different locations in like the 4D plane, then you could get it so that there is life at every time and in every location, just because the points would still be the same cardinality. But so
Did you
then
say
it
the
seems
same
like
thing for
then
tuning?
it's just a point about distribution.
Wait, but hold on. Would you say the same thing for tuning a universe for planes? Like if you would say, so let's say someone said, okay, well, the universe is fine-tuned for planes and it's done perfectly. And someone said, well, wait a minute, the only planes we ever observe are the Wright brothers. It's like just they get up a little bit and crash, and they're pretty shitty. And someone said, well, if you think the universe is infinite, then actually there's infinite Wright brothers planes. And so really it is perfectly tuned. So even though the planes are just clunky and the planes barely fly and the planes crash all the time, it really is.
I guess I'd say two things about that. The first one is I think we're somewhat more in the dark about what a god would do than a being that just wants to make as many planes as possible.
Well, we're stipulating that the god has the goal of tuning the universe for life, right?
Well, we're stipulating. I thought we were evaluating the probability of a perfect being, and so certainly a perfect being would have creating life as one of their goals.
A perfect being with the goal of creating life.
Well, I
right?
think it's likely that a perfect being would have the goal of creating life. It's not super obvious how a perfect being would want to distribute life, conditional on the perfect being creating life, and it's not obvious that this would be the only thing that the being cares about. And so if you had it so that the creature didn't just care about maximizing planes.
Understand. Yeah, I just need to make sure I'm following. So because there are hypotheses about perfect beings that are indifferent to creating life, and that could be expected here. Like you could just the being could be completely indifferent to creating life and just happenstance happen. That might be expected on this. Who knows? But I thought the comparison here was among perfect beings that have some that have some goal, or otherwise, if we're gonna jettison the goal here of creating that, at least have the goal of creating life. Because if we're gonna jettison that goal, then it seems like we're gonna have a different problem. We're gonna
Right.
have
So,
yeah.
Sorry. So to clarify, my view is that we're evaluating the hypothesis of there being a perfect being. And my claims are, first of all, that conditional on there being a perfect being, the odds that the perfect being would want to create life are much higher than the odds that you would get life by chance, given atheism. And so the fact that you get life, of a finely tuned sort, that's evidence for a perfect being. Now, it's true that you could have a hypothesis on which there's a perfect being that doesn't want to create life. But I think that you don't need the probability to be super high. All you need the probability to be is vastly higher.
No, I understand how you're getting through past the first. I understand how you get past the first issues of fine tuning of designer to no designer. What I'm not understanding is the comparison now in terms of comparing imperfect being designers to perfect being designers, because
right. So now,
and clouding the judgments, I don't think it's just going to be very helpful. I think that's just going to increase the confidence intervals, but I don't see how it's going to change my point estimate. Because
right.
if the move is to say, like, well, with the Wright brothers, we have a lower confidence interval about what the Wright brothers' goal is. I'm going to grant that, but it's not going to change much. Because
so if what you think is that if you observe a universe with planes, and then you discover the following two facts. One of them is that the odds that a universe would have had planes at all are just by chance, assuming the constants were set by chance, were astronomically low, on the order of 1 in 10 to the 60th, for instance. And you have a theory on which there's a designer, where one of the things that they like is planes, but that's not necessarily their only goal. Then I would think that the presence of planes would be evidence for that agent. If you're somewhat in the dark about their goals, you don't know how they'd want to distribute what you don't have necessarily a reason to be confident in what the distribution of planes is over, like, across space-time, and the odds of getting that number of planes by chance is astronomically low. Then even if the universe isn't maximizing planes, if it has infinite planes and you are somewhat in the dark about what their goals are, then that would be evidence.
So even if the planes, even if the planes are like the shittiest planes ever, right?
Well, sorry, regarding the shittiness of very
very shitty planes, like the Wright brothers planes, like
So my understanding, right? So if what you think is that there's a being who wants to make high quality planes, and you notice that all the planes that exist in the universe are shitty in various ways, I fully grant that would be evidence against against there being a being with that goal. Now, and analogously, I perfectly grant that the problem of evil is that just like the fact that so much of the universe is shitty, I grant that that's evidence.
This is not the problem of evil. Wait, but this, you understand that this is, I know you said analogously, but like this is, but you understand that this is not the same thing as just running the problem of evil.
Okay, sorry. Maybe
you might be able to run it in an analogous way, but it's not the problem. The problem is not that you've recognized evil. The problem is that you've recognized just shitty life. Like, life is that a universe that is just not good at making high quality life. It's not good at making life that survives well. It's not good at making life that thrives well. It's not good at making life that is lasts a long time. If it's just things that if you had, if in the same way of a plane, like the plane doesn't fly for a long time, the plane is very susceptible to crashing. The plane, it's not like this would cut against evil gods too, by the way. Like, this argument, like if a god was evil and wanted to create life to torture it, like this argument would work against that.
Right.
Well,
just like if the planes are decent, it would cut against sort of like a maximally imperfect.
Yeah. Like if someone wanted to create a bunch of planes to just destroy the planes, like if someone had it would cut against that too, because they can't even create the good planes anyway.
Yeah, right. So
it's not the problem. We agree it's not the problem of evil.
No, I don't agree with that. So I guess I think that there are.
Wait, you don't agree? You think it is the problem?
Yeah, I think it's the same basic data point as the problem of evil, even though it's
Wait,
So
you think the issue is wait, hold on, I just want to make sure what you're saying. You think the issue is it's a challenge that because we've observed evil.
Sorry, I don't think that you're explicitly raising the problem of evil. I think you're pointing to the same broad data points as those that are relevant to the problem of evil.
So you're saying,
in other words,
okay, wait, but
you're
that's not
double
the
counting
same.
the problem of evil.
Wait, but that's not. Wait, hold on, but that's not the same thing. Wait. So I agree that someone could run this issue in an analogous way that someone might run the problem of evil. Like if that's all you're saying, that's fine. Like just as if you're saying just analogously that evil is not expected on this hypothesis and yet we observe evil, you can say that X, where X is not the same thing as evil, is not expected on this hypothesis and yet you observe X. That's fine. If that's all you're saying, that's fine. But if you're saying something more substantive than that, then that's what I'm trying to elicit.
So let me just be clear on what I am saying. So I guess I think so. I grant evil is evidence against theism, but my view is that once you hold the presence of evil in the background, once you update on the probabilistic hit that theism takes from evil, then it won't take an additional probabilistic hit from this, because whatever the explanation is for the general shittiness of the universe, like whatever the explanation is for why God allowed a universe that had things that at the very least appear to be shitty in various ways, will also explain why life appears to be shitty in various ways. That is to say, why life seems to decay rapidly. So I think that's broadly going to be covered by the response to the problem of evil. Now, if the point is just about how life is rare and how life is rare
fleeting,
and doesn't
fleeting.
last for very good.
Yeah, rare and extremely fleeting, and yeah,
right. So
rare,
I think I grant that's distinct from the problem of evil, and a response to the problem of evil won't automatically explain that, though it will have some it will have like some ability to explain it, right? Because if you have some general explanation of why a ton of stuff in the world is shitty, then that might there at least that has a decent chance of being able to explain.
Sure. No,
why,
I agree
say, the distribution of life.
I agree that explanations can have some degree of overlap. Just like with the plane thing. Look, if you have just like if again, if you just saw only Wright brothers planes, one might say, well, there's a problem of evil that is like, we think planes are sentient and why are planes being tortured by crashing and everything? If we had some explanation to that, I agree. Yeah, no, but I agree that if we had some explanation for that, that might also account at least somewhat for why we're only seeing Wright brothers planes instead of like F-22 Raptors or whatever, or B-2 Spirits. Perhaps one can say the B-2 Spirit is more impervious to the sorts of problems, and that they wouldn't suffer as much. And we want there's a being that wants the planes to suffer, and so that's why they've created a universe where only Wright brothers planes exist. But of course, that's not the same objection. It's not going to explain all of it. There's going to be a lot more explaining to do. For example, one's going to say, okay, well, wait a minute. You could it also, because the major distinction is that this also cuts against evil designers. Like if someone wants to maximize evil planes, like doing evil to planes, if someone who says, okay, planes are sentient, we want to, we just want a universe that has all these amazing planes that we're just going to be torturing. Yeah, I mean, this is just going to cut against that as well. And likewise, explanations for why we only, for why there's injuries and scratches to planes and decay of planes, it's also not going to be a full explanation to why only Wright brothers planes exist.
So sorry. So maybe let's take stock at this point, and I have to go in a few minutes, but
sure.
But yeah, happy to pick this up some other time. And I think there are many other things we disagree about, which we should talk about at some point as well. So I guess sorry. So my sense of the dialectic is, so you were suggesting, we didn't unfortunately get to talk about your kind of version of the stalking horse argument. We'll have to pick that up some other time. But regarding this worry, this kind of overtuning worry, so so you are giving the plane analogy, and my point is just that if you think that the plane is not that bringing about high quality planes isn't the only thing that they care about, then while the fact that planes are shitty and that they're short lived, so the fact that they're shitty planes, I grant, would be some evidence against a being that cares about creating high quality planes. I think that the sort of probabilistic import of that will be similar to the probabilistic import of the problem of evil, right? So it's just like the problem of shittiness is.
Do you think shittiness is all encompassed by evil? It's all subsumed. Like everything that goes into shittiness is just going to be covered by evil.
I don't think that they're the same thing, right? Because as you rightly note, the fact that the planes are shitty to some degree, but also not like totally horrendous, that that won't be like, that'll also be evidence against an evil god. Well, obviously the mere presence of evil won't be evidence against an evil god. But I'm saying I think that the probabilistic impact that that shittiness has against the good god hypothesis is broadly an extension of the problem that it's broadly an extension of the problem of evil. Similar to how, imagine you made the following argument against theism. You made the argument from cancer, where you were like, cancer sucks, seems to set back a being's goal. Well, I agree cancer sucks, and, all else equal, that would be evidence against theism. I think broadly cancer will be, just whatever you say about the problem of evil is very likely to cover cancer.
Well, yeah. So okay. So if that's talking about certain things like cancer, yes, I agree that there are certain things. But that wasn't my question. My question is, do you think that's going to?
So I was saying I thought that shittiness is analogous to cancer, where it's sort of like it's kind of one class of imperfection in the universe, but I think it's just whatever you say about the problem of evil will broadly cover it. So I think counting it as a distinct, like if you're going to count it as a response to fine tuning,
do you think it's evil that humans only that life has like certain like limits in terms of the amount of cells that can divide and then they die? Do you think it's evil? Would you consider that as the same thing as evil? Do you think it's evil that life has a very small probability of obtaining? Do you think it's evil that life is it just
at least in the sense of evil? I mean, it's often noted that the sense of evil used in the problem of evil isn't actually what the word evil means, where really it just means bad things. But sure, I grant all those things are bad things.
So you grant that? Wait. So you're granting that life only existing for a small amount of time, that's just an evil thing.
I think. Sorry, let me sort of extend the statement. I grant that it sort of like looks like a bad thing pro tanto, though there might be all things considered reasons that vindicate it.
You think that? So you think that? So the move here is, so if you're gonna if you're going to define all the things that we would consider shitty as evil and subsume it into the problem of evil, then I agree. If you define evil that way, then it's going to carry a similar epistemic import as the problem of evil. However, what you've done is you've made the problem of evil a more impactful argument, because my understanding of the problem of evil wasn't just those mere things. It was more specific things that we recognize as evil. But yeah, if you broaden the problem of evil to include things like, the Wright brothers plane, like if you say, well, it's evil that the plane can only take off for a small amount of time, it's evil that the plane is clunky, it's evil that the plane is not aesthetically pleasing, it's evil that the plane so what you've done, you've now converted the problem into the problem of evil, but you've made the problem of evil a lot stronger.
Yeah, so what I think of the problem of evil as being, and this might just be a terminological note, but what I think of the problem of evil as being is you just, like, you look around at the world and there are lots of things that seem bad, at least in relative terms, where they seem like either they are bad, all things considered, or they could be a lot better. And you're like, why is this true if there's a perfect being?
Right. No, I understand that. Yeah, I get that. The issue is that you seem to be including things that people wouldn't typically include in that. Like,
so I don't know. I guess,
so for
often people. So I'll grant that people often, when they're talking about the problem of evil,
like if someone says like, if someone says like, why is there not life on Mars? Like, isn't that so evil? Like, well, no. I mean, I don't think people like just go look at the fact that there's no life on Mars and say, well, that's evil. And they say like, okay, well, why is so I mean, this is gonna, so this is gonna be a point of,
Yeah.
of
So
relevance.
sorry. So we could like continue arguing about whether the semantics about whether it's categorized under the problem of evil. I would think it would, but I think that would likely. Sorry. Hello.
Yeah, I'm here.
Sorry. I heard some that I couldn't tell if you were talking and roboting or if someone else was talking or something. Sorry. So, but I guess I'll just say it. Okay, let's define let's just to avoid the need for semantic quibbles. I'm sorry. After this, I'll have to get going. Let's just define there as being some broader problem, which is like the problem of non-ideality or something, which is just like everything in the world, the problem of everything in the world that's less good than
right.
you think it
But
might otherwise
because
be.
the problem of non-ideality cuts against evil gods, where the problem of evil wouldn't, right?
Right. So then I would grant that.
So it's not the problem of evil. Problem of non-ideality is not the problem of evil because one cuts against evil.
It'll depend on how we count things, because you might take, if you take the problem of non-ideality as merely being the observation that there are a range of things in the world that have the property of being non-ideal or of being apparently non-ideal in various ways, then that fact alone would not count against an evil god, because you would expect that it's only if you take into account the more specific facts about them being more ideal than you would expect on an evil god. But right, so if we just think, so if we take the
I thought that ideally evil. Like it's not ideally evil.
Sorry, when I used ideal, I meant like ideal in a good sense, like morally.
Okay. Well, wait. So then a non-ideality wouldn't cut against an evil god unless we have further.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, that's what I was saying. But so what I was saying was, if we think about,
but that's not. Yeah, but that's not what I. Yeah, but
sorry. So if we think of the problem of non-ideality as what I described, then what I think you're pointing to is particular instances of the problem of non-ideality. And I basically think the problem of non-ideality is the best argument against theism. And so if you include sort of, part of the problem of non-ideality, like basically if fine-tuning and the problem of non-ideality just cancel out, I'd be perfectly fine with that, because I think it's the best argument against theism. And then I think there are other good arguments. But if you count it, if you point to facts about ways that life is non-ideal, then I think I'll grant that taking that into account, it makes vastly less clear the net impact of fine-tuning if you take that into account with the data that you're counting for fine-tuning. But then I just think then you're counting both the data sort of like the data supporting a very different argument against theism, and it's likely covered by the broader problem of non-ideality. But then if you don't take into account facts about life being non-ideal, then I think that fine-tuning is very strong evidence against theism, even if you take into account facts about the distribution. I'll let you have the last word.
Yeah.
Nice chatting. And happy to chat again sometime.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess what I would say is a couple things. So the first thing is that, like the main point here is that to whatever degree one is going to broaden the problem of evil to subsume all non-ideal things and all and so not just things like suffering or things like a lack of well-being. They're going to include things like all sorts of even like aesthetic considerations, I guess, even in the absence of suffering or whatnot, or even things like duration or location. You could optimize the symmetry. If you're going to include everything under like the problem of evil, then yes, you can make my this issue to look more like the problem of evil. However, it's not going to. You've improved the problem of evil now. Like the problem of evil isn't as, because now there's just more data that's not expected that you're calling the problem of evil that's going to carry more weight than a version of the problem of evil that would only consider things like overt suffering or lack of well-being or like things like cancer or whatever. So that move right there, I want to have that move right there. It doesn't get you to the same place. It gets you to the worst place. It either gets you to a problem of evil that does more work than a lesser problem of evil, and to whatever degree it doesn't, then it wouldn't be double counting. It would actually just be an issue here. And then the other thing is just like, just consider the it's I mean, it does. The other thing is, I guess it just doesn't sound that implausible that we see life like this on these other hypotheses. Like, if just to intuition pump it a bit, like, we've always gotten a prototype of some sort when we look at agents to try to make some inference about a designer for the universe. We say, okay, well, they like to design things. Well, the agents that we look at, they've designed Wright brothers planes. They designed first, second, and third prototypes. And it just seems like this universe is just another prototype. I don't know if it's the first, second, or third prototype, but it's certainly a far cry from a perfect prototype. It's not the most imperfect prototype, but it's a pretty bad one. And so, and I say bad, not to get into the initial problem of evil thing, but it's certainly not it's not expected. I mean, it's just the issue is just a lack of expectation. But yeah, we can continue this.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot at the end you said that I disagreed with, but
sure.
Yes, but yeah, very nice chatting. Happy to chat again sometime. Yeah, I think you're raising interesting objections. Always enjoy our chats. Yeah, and thanks for listening, everyone. All right, have a good rest of your day. Bye.
All right, enjoy.